The year was 1971, and Bruce Lee stood at the precipice of international stardom. Having already conquered American television with his role as Kato in The Green Hornet and preparing for what would become his legendary film career, Lee found himself in Tokyo, Japan, on a journey that combined philosophical exploration with martial arts demonstration. The city buzzed with anticipation whenever word spread that the Chinese-American martial artist was in town. Tokyo's martial arts community, steeped in centuries of tradition and samurai heritage, viewed this visit with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Bruce Lee represented something entirely different from their classical traditions. He embodied the concept of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, a philosophy that rejected rigid forms in favor of adaptability and directness. Among the dojos and training halls scattered throughout Tokyo, rumors began to circulate about a potential encounter that would test not just physical prowess, but the very philosophies that undergirded Eastern and Western martial arts approaches. The challenge came from an unexpected quarter, a female samurai master whose lineage traced back through generations of sword-wielding warriors. Her name was spoken with reverence in certain circles, though she maintained a privacy that bordered on reclusiveness. This woman had dedicated her entire life to the art of kenjutsu, the classical Japanese swordsmanship that predated modern kendo. She had inherited techniques passed down through her family for over 300 years, techniques that had been forged in the crucible of actual combat during Japan's feudal era. Her mastery was not merely technical, it was spiritual, embodying the samurai concept of zanshin, the sustained state of awareness and mental presence. When she heard about Bruce Lee's presence in Tokyo and his revolutionary approach to martial arts, she felt compelled to issue a challenge, not out of hostility or arrogance, but from a sincere desire to test whether the ancient ways could stand against this modern interpretation of combat. The challenge was delivered through intermediaries, as was customary, and it specified that she would face him with her sword while he would remain unarmed. This was not meant as an unfair advantage, but rather as a statement of confidence in her traditional methods. Bruce Lee, upon receiving the challenge, could have easily declined. After all, facing a master swordsman while unarmed seemed not just dangerous but potentially foolish. However, Lee's entire philosophy was built upon the premise that martial arts should transcend style and tradition, that water could flow or crash, that a true martial artist must be formless and adaptable to any situation. To decline would be to contradict everything he had been teaching and developing. Moreover, Lee understood that this challenge represented something larger than a simple demonstration of skill. It was a meeting between old and new, between the rigidly structured, kata-based training of classical Japanese martial arts and his own fluid, responsive approach. Lee accepted the challenge, but he did so with careful consideration and preparation, knowing that underestimating a master of any discipline would be the height of foolishness. The encounter was arranged at a private dojo in a quieter district of Tokyo, away from public spectacle and media attention. Those present were select witnesses from both the traditional Japanese martial arts community and individuals who had been following Bruce Lee's development of Jeet Kune Do. The atmosphere was electric with tension and mutual respect. The dojo itself was a traditional structure, its wooden floors polished by decades of barefoot training, its walls adorned with calligraphy expressing martial virtues. The female samurai master arrived dressed in traditional hakama, the pleated pants worn by practitioners of Japanese sword arts, her sword, a genuine katana that had been in her family for generations, secured in its scabbard. Her demeanor was calm, focused, embodying the composed readiness that marked genuine mastery. Bruce Lee entered wearing simple training clothes, his movements economical and precise, his eyes alert but not aggressive. The preliminary formalities were observed with traditional bows, an acknowledgement of respect between practitioners, regardless of their different approaches. As the two faced each other across the dojo floor, the contrast in their stances was immediately apparent. She stood in a classical kamae, the ready position of traditional swordsmanship, her weight distributed perfectly, her hands positioned on the sword's handle with practiced precision. Lee adopted a stance that seemed almost casual by comparison, yet those who understood his method recognized the coiled potential in his positioning, the way his body was simultaneously relaxed and ready to explode into action. The rules were simple. She would attempt to strike him with her sword using controlled techniques, and he would attempt to neutralize her attacks and disarm her using only his bare hands. It was understood that both would exercise control to prevent serious injury, but the intensity would be genuine. The match began with the samurai master's initial testing attack, a measured downward cut designed to gauge Lee's reaction time and defensive strategy. Bruce Lee's response was instantaneous. He didn't move away, but rather into the attack, utilizing the principle of interception that was central to his philosophy. His timing was so precise that he entered the distance before her sword could generate full power, simultaneously deflecting the blade's path with one hand while his other hand moved toward a controlling position. The speed of this exchange was breathtaking to witnesses, happening in a fraction of a second. The samurai master immediately recognized that she was facing someone whose reflexes and timing were extraordinary. She withdrew and reset, her respect for her opponent deepening. What followed was a series of exchanges that demonstrated the highest levels of martial skill from both practitioners. She employed various classical attacks, overhead cuts, diagonal slashes, thrusts, each executed with the perfection that comes from thousands of hours of repetitive training. Lee responded with a combination of evasion, redirection, and controlled striking that kept him inside the sword's effective range, where her weapon became less advantageous. His footwork was exceptional, allowing him to maintain positions where the sword could not develop full cutting power. Perhaps most impressive was his ability to read her intentions, to sense the micro-movements that preceded each attack, allowing him to respond not just to the sword's movement, but to the decision to move it. This demonstrated one of the key principles of Jeet Kune Do, the interception of the opponent's intent, not merely their technique. As the demonstration continued, it became clear that Bruce Lee had developed an approach that could indeed neutralize even a master swordsman's attacks. The critical moment came when the samurai master committed to a full power attack, a classical technique that had been perfected through her lineage for generations. Lee's response was a perfect embodiment of his philosophy. He simultaneously redirected the sword's path with a precise hand movement while closing distance and applying a controlling technique to her arms that rendered the weapon useless. In that instant, he could have delivered any number of strikes, but instead, he demonstrated control and respect by merely indicating the possibilities rather than following through. The encounter concluded with mutual bows and, witnesses reported, genuine smiles of appreciation between the two masters. What had begun as a challenge transformed into a dialogue between martial philosophies. The samurai master acknowledged that Bruce Lee's approach possessed validity and effectiveness that transcended style, while Lee expressed deep respect for the technical perfection and mental discipline embodied in classical Japanese swordsmanship. The encounter in Tokyo became one of those legendary moments in martial arts history, though it remained largely within the community for years before stories began to emerge publicly. What made this encounter significant was not simply that Bruce Lee had successfully defended against a sword-wielding opponent while unarmed, though that was remarkable, but rather what it represented philosophically. It demonstrated that martial effectiveness could emerge from different methodological approaches, that the rigid kata-based training of classical Japanese arts and the adaptive, principle-based training of Jeet Kune Do could both produce genuine mastery. The samurai master's willingness to test her art against a completely different approach showed the true warrior spirit, the desire for growth and understanding over ego protection. For Bruce Lee, the encounter validated his belief that martial arts should be practical and adaptable, that techniques should emerge from principles rather than being bound by tradition. In the years following this 1971 encounter, Bruce Lee would go on to achieve global fame through his films, spreading his martial arts philosophy to millions. The samurai master continued her private teaching, incorporating lessons from the encounter into her understanding of combat, demonstrating that even the most traditional practitioner could evolve through challenge and dialogue. The story of their meeting, when it eventually became more widely known, inspired countless practitioners to look beyond style boundaries and focus on the underlying principles that make martial arts effective. It reminded the martial arts world that respect and learning can occur even in challenge and competition, that testing oneself against different approaches strengthens rather than weakens one's own practice. The encounter also highlighted something often overlooked in martial arts discussions: the importance of timing, distance, and reading the opponent's intentions over mere technique. Both practitioners demonstrated these attributes at the highest level, proving that these fundamental elements transcend any particular style or weapon. Today, the story serves as a reminder that martial arts at its highest level is about more than fighting. It's about the pursuit of excellence, the willingness to test oneself, and the humility to learn from every encounter, regardless of outcome.